I don't think I'll ever tell anybody.
Really?
It's May 31st.
All right, well, you just...
Clint Eastwood, born on May 31st, 1930, in San Francisco, California, is one of Hollywood's most enduring legends, rising to fame with spaghetti westerns like A Fistful of Dollars and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. He became an international star, embodying rugged masculinity and stoic strength. Transitioning from acting to directing, Eastwood earned critical acclaim with films such as Unforgiven and $1 Million Baby, both winning Academy Awards. Beyond cinema, his career reflects discipline, resilience, and cultural impact. Over decades, Eastwood has remained a symbol of American determination, leaving an indelible mark on film history. Clint Eastwood is portrayed as a no-nonsense director who values efficiency on set, prepared actors, minimal takes, one-take philosophy, and has a secret blacklist of actors who wasted his time. Disrespect for action filmcraft by Richard Burton. After building his reputation on professionalism and discipline, Clint Eastwood's collaboration with Richard Burton in the 1968 war classic Where Eagles Dare turned into one of the most frustrating experiences of his career. On paper, the partnership seemed promising. Burton was already a celebrated Shakespearean actor with worldwide fame, while Eastwood was ascending as Hollywood's new tough guy. But behind the scenes, their working styles clashed dramatically. Burton was notorious for arriving late on set, often under the influence of alcohol, and his lack of preparation infuriated Eastwood, who prided himself on efficiency and respect for the crew's time. One of the major points of conflict was Burton's demand for endless retakes. Known for his perfectionism, or indecisiveness, Burton sometimes insisted on shooting a single scene dozens of times. This stood in sharp contrast to Eastwood's one-take philosophy, where he believed that the first, most natural performance was often the best. For Eastwood, who valued momentum and authenticity, Burton's behavior felt like self-indulgence and disrespect. To make matters worse, Burton openly dismissed the project as a mere money job, showing little regard for the action genre or the effort of his co-stars. Eastwood, who took even commercial projects seriously, found this attitude deeply offensive. The tension between them grew, and although the film became a commercial success, Eastwood left the production with a bitter impression of Burton. In later interviews, he summarized his feelings with a sharp remark, "Talented guy, wasted talent." Eastwood acknowledged Burton's remarkable abilities as an actor, but lamented his lack of discipline, commitment, and respect for the craft. For a man like Clint, who built his career on hard work and consistency, Burton embodied the tragic waste of genius undone by excess and arrogance. This conflict became a defining example of Eastwood's intolerance for unprofessional behavior in Hollywood. While he respected talent, he believed it was worthless without discipline. Richard Burton, to Clint Eastwood, symbolized everything he despised in an actor: brilliance squandered by vanity, addiction, and lack of respect for the work. And although Where Eagles Dare remains a fan favorite, for Eastwood, it stood as a reminder of one of the most exasperating partnerships of his career. Jean Seberg's troubled on-set behavior. Following his tense experience with Richard Burton on Where Eagles Dare, Clint Eastwood soon encountered another collaboration that would leave him equally bitter: his work with Jean Seberg in the 1969 musical Western Paint Your Wagon. While the film attempted to blend Eastwood's rugged screen persona with song and dance, the behind-the-scenes relationship between him and Seberg quickly deteriorated. For Eastwood, who valued efficiency, professionalism, and emotional restraint on set, Seberg's behavior proved to be the opposite of everything he respected. Seberg was known for her erratic and emotional approach to acting, which clashed directly with Eastwood's steady and minimalist style. She often arrived late to filming or seemed distracted, which frustrated a man who prided himself on punctuality. Even more exasperating for Eastwood was her habit of interrupting scenes to discuss her character's motivations in exhaustive detail, something Clint considered unnecessary and pretentious. He preferred to trust instincts and keep momentum moving forward, while Seberg's method slowed down the production and created unnecessary tension. The professional conflict didn't end there. After Paint Your Wagon failed both critically and commercially, Seberg openly criticized Eastwood in interviews. She described him as wooden and ill-suited for musical theater, essentially mocking his attempts to adapt to a genre outside his usual comfort zone. For Clint, who had stepped outside his typical action and Western roles to experiment with a musical, these public remarks felt like betrayal. While he could tolerate differences in method during filming, her comments after the movie's failure crossed a line. As years passed, Eastwood deliberately avoided mentioning Seberg in discussions about his career. When asked, he would only offer vague remarks, once saying, "Some people just aren't cut out for this business." The statement reflected not only his disappointment in her professionalism, but also his belief that discipline and adaptability were essential qualities in Hollywood. To him, Seberg symbolized a type of actor he had no patience for. Someone talented, yes, but unreliable, overly dramatic, and incapable of respecting the collaborative nature of filmmaking. For Eastwood, the failure of Paint Your Wagon was not just a box office disappointment, but also a cautionary tale about working with actors whose temperament clashed with his philosophy. While he would go on to enjoy one of the most successful directing and acting careers in Hollywood, he carried with him the memory of difficult collaborations like Seberg's. To this day, it remains an example of why Clint Eastwood kept his circle small, trusted his instincts, and maintained a strict code of professionalism that became the hallmark of his legendary career. Clint and Tommy creative clash. After the bitter memories of clashing with Richard Burton and Jean Seberg, Clint Eastwood faced yet another difficult collaboration in the early 1990s, this time with Tommy Lee Jones on In the Line of Fire, 1993. On paper, their pairing looked perfect. Two actors known for their intensity, discipline, and raw screen presence. But in reality, their strong personalities collided on set. Eastwood, who had built his career on efficiency, calm control, and his first take philosophy, found Jones to be a disruptive force. Jones was known for his fiery energy and immersive approach to acting, but for Eastwood, it quickly crossed into showboating. On set, Jones often tried to steal the spotlight, exaggerating mannerisms or stretching dialogue to draw attention to himself. Even after the director called cut, Jones frequently remained in character, carrying his intensity into off-camera moments. For Eastwood, who preferred to leave the performance on the screen, this was exhausting and unnecessary. He valued a clean separation between acting and reality, while Jones blurred those boundaries in ways Clint found irritating. Another source of tension was their frequent disagreements about scene interpretation. Jones, with his sharp intellect and relentless drive, often challenged how a scene should be played, offering his own ideas and resisting direction. Eastwood, who trusted instinct and spontaneity, believed too much discussion only killed authenticity. His philosophy was simple. The first natural take was usually the truest. Joan, however, pushed for retakes and adjustments, which clashed directly with Eastwood's minimalist approach. Their arguments never exploded into open feuds, but the undercurrent of tension was clear, with both men refusing to bend to the other's style. In the end, In the Line of Fire became a critical and commercial success. Yet Eastwood left the experience frustrated. Years later, when asked about working with Jones, he summed it up bluntly: "Tommy's got his way, I've got mine." For Eastwood, that was his way of acknowledging that while Jones was talented, their working philosophies were simply incompatible. Clint's respect for discipline and instinct clashed too strongly with Jones's intensity and need to dominate scenes. The experience cemented Eastwood's long-held belief that not all great actors can work well together. Sometimes, talent isn't enough if two philosophies stand in direct opposition. For Clint, Tommy Lee Jones represented a type of actor he avoided in the future. Brilliant, yes, but too forceful, too unyielding, and too determined to leave his own stamp at the expense of the collaboration. Though the film's success softened the sting, Eastwood never forgot the lesson. Some styles simply don't mix. And in Hollywood, that can turn even a hit movie into a bitter memory. Wayne's harsh words for Eastwood. After a series of turbulent collaborations with fellow actors, Clint Eastwood faced one of the most unexpected and bitter rifts of his career: his clash with John Wayne, the legendary Duke of classic westerns. The conflict began in 1973 after Eastwood directed and starred in High Plains Drifter, a dark and violent western that departed from the traditional heroic narratives Wayne had embodied for decades. Eastwood's film was bleak, morally ambiguous, and filled with an unflinching portrayal of violence and corruption. To younger audiences, it represented a bold, modern reinvention of the genre. To John Wayne, however, it was nothing less than a betrayal of the Western tradition he had spent his career defending. When Eastwood reached out to Wayne with the idea of working together on a future project, the response was not what he expected. Wayne, offended by the tone of High Plains Drifter, reportedly wrote him an angry letter criticizing the movie's grim worldview. He believed Eastwood had tarnished the legacy of the Old West by stripping away its honor and turning it into a stage for brutality. To Wayne, Westerns were meant to be moral tales of courage and justice. To Eastwood, they were vehicles for exploring human flaws and the darker realities of frontier life. The generational and philosophical gap between the two men quickly widened into outright hostility. According to accounts, Wayne didn't just stop at criticism. In private correspondence, he referred to Eastwood in harsh terms, calling him "ese pedazo de mierda otra vez," loosely translated as "that piece of shit again." The insult captured just how deep Wayne's disdain had grown, as he came to view Eastwood not just as a rival, but as an active threat to the cinematic values he cherished. For Eastwood, the insult and rejection solidified the idea that Wayne saw him as the destroyer of a genre rather than its natural evolution. Although Eastwood never engaged in a public feud, he carried the sting of Wayne's disapproval. He had admired the Duke's legacy, but also recognized that Wayne represented an older Hollywood unwilling to adapt to changing times. For Clint, the bitterness came not from creative differences alone, but from the personal contempt Wayne directed at him. He later remarked in interviews that it was pointless to try and bridge the gap. Their worldviews were simply too far apart. In the end, Eastwood's hatred toward Wayne was less about rivalry and more about betrayal. He had hoped for mutual respect between two icons of the Western genre, but instead received scorn and insults. High Plains Drifter became a symbol of that divide, a film celebrated by one generation while condemned by another. To Clint Eastwood, John Wayne was not just a critic, He was the embodiment of an era that refused to pass the torch, and his harsh words ensured that reconciliation would never come. Clash of styles with DiCaprio. After decades of clashes with actors whose methods clashed with his own, Clint Eastwood encountered one of his most exhausting collaborations in 2011 while directing J. Edgar with Leonardo DiCaprio in the lead role. On the surface, the pairing seemed promising. Eastwood, the no-nonsense director known for his minimalist approach, and DiCaprio, one of Hollywood's most dedicated and respected actors of his generation. But soon, the fundamental differences in their styles became impossible to ignore. DiCaprio is famous for his intense preparation and methodical research. For J. Edgar, he spent months studying Hoover's life, his speech patterns, and psychological nuances. On set, this translated into countless requests for multiple takes, each one slightly different, as he sought to capture subtle shades of emotion. For many directors, such dedication is admirable. For Eastwood, however, it was the complete opposite of his philosophy. He has long believed that the rawest, most authentic performances happen in the first take. The more a scene is repeated, the more artificial it becomes. Watching DiCaprio push for repetition frustrated Eastwood, who saw it as unnecessary overanalysis. The tension grew as Eastwood began to feel that DiCaprio did not fully trust his direction. Eastwood, known for giving actors freedom but also expecting efficiency, interpreted Leo's insistence on experimentation as a lack of confidence in his judgment. The atmosphere on set became strained, with Eastwood quietly stewing over what he considered wasted time, while DiCaprio remained committed to dissecting every layer of his character. By the end of filming, the clash of philosophies had taken its toll. Although J. Edgar received praise for DiCaprio's performance, Eastwood privately admitted that the process had left him drained. In reflecting on the experience, he offered a biting metaphor. Some people want to climb the mountain. Others want to analyze and write poetry about the mountain. The remark was widely interpreted as a veiled critique of DiCaprio, a recognition of his talent, but also a dismissal of his painstaking, analytical style. For Clint, acting was about instinct, not endless intellectualization. In the years since, Eastwood has rarely spoken of DiCaprio, avoiding open criticism, but never seeking to work with him again. The experience reinforced his belief that not all forms of brilliance are compatible. To him, DiCaprio represented the modern school of acting, obsessive, layered, and endlessly self-critical, while he himself stood as the old guard, valuing spontaneity, efficiency, and raw instinct above all. Thus, the clash between Clint Eastwood and Leonardo DiCaprio was not about personal animosity, but about irreconcilable artistic philosophies. For Clint, Leo's brilliance was undeniable, but his methods were exhausting. The result was a partnership that produced a strong film but left behind bitterness, frustration, and a quiet resolve never to climb that particular mountain again. Why Clint Eastwood hated Barbra Streisand after years of clashing with actors over methods and philosophies. Clint Eastwood also found himself at odds with a fellow filmmaker he never even worked with directly, Barbra Streisand. Unlike his disputes with Richard Burton, Jean Seberg, or Leonardo DiCaprio, which came from shared projects, his disdain for Streisand stemmed from a long-standing rivalry rooted in radically different creative approaches. Streisand, as both actress and director, was known for her perfectionism, demanding dozens of takes for a single scene, meticulously controlling every shot and calculating each emotional beat. To her admirers, this represented artistry and dedication. To Eastwood, it was the antithesis of authenticity. He viewed her obsessive repetition as an act of manufacturing emotion rather than capturing it naturally. In 1992, Eastwood's raw Unforgiven clashed with Streisand's polished Prince of Tides, exposing their opposing cinematic philosophies during award season. Unforgiven won, emphasizing their rivalry. What made the feud sting deeper was that Streisand, unlike others Clint had clashed with, was not just an actor, but also a director competing in the same arena. While Clint valued speed, efficiency, and raw authenticity, Barbra stood for control, polish, and detailed construction. Their rivalry became symbolic of a broader cultural debate in Hollywood: instinct versus calculation, raw truth versus refined artistry. And while Clint Eastwood would go on to become synonymous with lean, instinct-driven filmmaking, Streisand carved her legacy as a perfectionist, unafraid to embrace meticulous craftsmanship. For Clint, the dislike was not personal in the sense of betrayal, but philosophical. He simply could not respect a process he believed strangled the life out of cinema. Streisand, in his eyes, epitomized the kind of filmmaker who confused precision with truth. And though the two remain towering figures in Hollywood history, their names are often linked by this sharp contrast. To Clint Eastwood, Barbra Streisand was not an enemy by circumstance but by ideology, a rival who represented the very opposite of everything he believed about art. Eastwood's blacklist philosophy. In the end, Clint Eastwood's so-called blacklist was never about personal hatred, but about defending his artistic philosophy. He respected preparation, but placed his trust in instinct and the power of the first take. For him, wasting time on endless retakes or indulging in perfectionism only killed authenticity. His clashes with stars like Burton, Seberg, DiCaprio, and Streisand reflected not ego, but a refusal to compromise on values. The lesson is clear. In Hollywood, collaboration can only last when both sides respect each other's methods and creative principles. If you enjoyed exploring Clint Eastwood's untold truths, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories.